Hey all, welcome to this section of the course. This section will serve as a Python crash course. So if you don't have an introduction in Python, this section will kind of go through the basics so you can kind of follow along and learn Python. It's by no means meant to be a, hey, this is everything you need to know about Python, but I think it'll serve as a good starting point if you don't know Python. So with that, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my command prompt, and I'm going to open up Jupyter Notebook. That's going to take a second. Once that's open, I am going to go over to the location for my Python crash course. So crash course Python. And I'm going to open up this Python crash course Jupyter Notebooks file. Now, like in previous section, the way I like to code is that I like to actually do it instead of running somebody else's code. And that's what I would encourage you to do as well, especially if you're trying to learn Python. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new notebook where I will name it, I will name this Python crash course personal. So, and I'm gonna go ahead and create two screens out of this. Okay, cool. So just to go over what we'll cover in this section, we'll cover data types. In Python, we'll cover comparison operators, if, else if, and else statements, for loops, while loops, range, list comprehensions, functions, lambda expressions, and so on and so forth. Don't get too overrun by it. I'll go through it very quickly and easily so that we're able to understand it. So let's first go by data types. So Python can deal with, as you probably saw in when I was going through some of the earlier work, it deals natively with numbers pretty well. So you can add numbers. So if I wanted to do 1 plus 1, I could get a 2. You could also multiply numbers. So 1 times 3, you could get 3. You can also divide numbers. 1 divided by 2, you get 0.5. You can also square, you can do like 2 to the 4th, and you can get that, 16. You can also do like, hey, I want to do 4 divided by 2, but I only want to get the remainder. So you can do that this way, 4% sign 2. And let's do another one where there's actually a remainder. So 5% sign 2, you can get that 1. One other quick thing that I want to mention is that when I'm writing code, I like to comment it, right? So the way you can comment is this hashtag sign or pound sign, and just say like, hey, or say something like 5 or remainder of 5 divided by 2, and then you can do 5 divided 5% sign 2. So this way, Python doesn't read this code, but you can have it in your code block to know what it's doing. This is especially important when things get a bit complicated. So so Python also follows orders of operations. So I can do something like this. 5 plus 5, so it will be 2 plus 3, which is 5, times 5 plus 5, which is 10. So it'll do whatever is in the parentheses first. So 10 times 5, or 5 times 10, and you get 50. Cool. Now let's go over to variable assignment. So I'm just going to create this variable assignment. And I'm going to make this into a markdown and press enter. Okay, cool. So with Python, you can create your own variable and assign it a value of whatever you want. And you can name it anything you want. So let's say you know, whatever your name of your variable is. So I'm going to create an object or create a variable name of variable, and I'm going to give it a value of 2. So once I do that, if I type in name of variable, I get 2. So now, like whenever I type in, like, you know, name of variables times 3, it's 2 times 3, which is 6, so on and so forth. You also have the ability in Python to combine strings. So let's say I have x equals 2 and I have y equals 3. And I want to do z equals x plus y. So this will be 2 plus 3 essentially. So z has now a assigned value, and I can say that z is 2 plus 3, which is 5. What you can't do in Python is add like different data types. So let's say that I create a new variable called p, and I'm going to do x plus just y, right? So y is 3. So it should be, or x plus stry. So this is a integer. X has a value of 2, and y has a value of 3. So if I try to do this, I'll get an error that says, and this is kind of like how a typical Python error would look, and it'll tell you like what the error is and kind of where it's at. Unsupported operand types for plus, which is integer and string. So it's basically telling me that I can't add a string and a integer. So let's go back to combining. If I did want to combine, you know, different data type variables, I could do something like this. So let's say my name of variable is still 5, and I say that x is ABC. Now I want to create a new variable called z, and I want to do x, so abc plus str. So I'm converting, this is an integer, but I'm converting it to a string, and I'm saying that z is abc plus string 5. So let's see what that does. So if I do just z, I'll get abc 5. So that's a little bit of variable assignment. And now, like, you know, whenever I refer to something, so like let's say the last time I referred to a value of y, let's say it was right here, and so y is 3. So Python will recognize that throughout. Now if I can also change the value to, like, you know, 5. Now y is 5. So it's the latest assignment that it will pick up. So let's go to strings. So let's go put this in the markdown. String. So strings is fairly straightforward. I can say something like, hey, this is, you know, anything in single quotes or stuff in a single quote. You can, you know, and it will read it as that. You can do the same thing, stuff in double quotes, that. Now, if you have like something like apostrophe, you want to put it in double quotes if you, because it's the best way to use double or use, you know, in Python is the best way to like get around the apostrophe. So if you have something like, if you have apostrophes, something like that, it's best to use double quotes. So if you see this apostrophe, it didn't read it as a single quote, it read it as double quotes, or it read it as this apostrophe. Now, if I did the same thing in single quotes, it would give me an error because it doesn't recognize like that, hey, the quote, this is apostrophe, not part of the quote. So it'll give you an invalid syntax error. So that is strings. Now let's go to printing. So in this one, I'm going to give x a variable assignment with a value of hello. So if I type x, I get hello with quotation marks. But if I do something like print x, I'll get hello. So quick difference, but it's I thought it'd be good to point that out. Now you can also do like string formatting. So if you want to do something like, okay, let's say that my the num is 12, and or num, the variable num has a value of 12, and the variable name has a value of Sam. So I can do something like print my number is, and I can type in 1 here. So I do these open curly brackets and I put 1 there, and then I say, and my name is, and let's say 2. So in total, and I do something like this. So in total, I'm printing something, and I'm printing my number is, and I'm passing in a, this is me formatting it, and I'm giving it or I'm defining this as 1. I haven't told Python what 1 is yet, and I'm saying that, and my name is, and I'm defining this as 2. Again, I haven't told Python what 2 is yet. So now I can say that 1 is num and 2 is name. So it should print out my number is 1, which is num. So my number is 12, and my name is 2, and the name is 2 is Sam. So I could do something like this. So my number is 12, 1 is num, and 12 is num, and then 2 is name, and name is Sam. So let's say I wanted to do this, but I don't want to pass in, I don't necessarily have to pass in the, I don't have to say that, hey, this is 1, this is 2, but it has to be in the correct order. So let's say that I go do something like this. So my name is open curly brackets, and my number is open curly brackets, and my name is curly brackets again, dot format. And so I can pass in just name and num, and it will, like in this case, I'm telling it what 1 is, or like that, hey, this is 1, and then I'm defining 1 and 2. And here it's just going to take it by the order. So the first curly bracket is going to be name, the second curly bracket is going to be num. So now if I did this again and I put num and name, it would reverse it, right? But let's say that I was to reverse these two guys, but not change the, the location of where 1 is, where 2 is, but what order I put the format in. So 2 is name, and 1 is num, or 1 is num. It will still come out as my name is 12 because 1 is num, and my name is Sam because 2 is name. So order really matters, but if you have variable assignment within the format, order does not matter. So that's a little bit of the printing. So now let's go into the list. So I'm going to create this. So list is just data type, which you can have different values within a list. So let's say that it starts with brackets. So I have a list with 1, 2, and 3, or 3. So this is how I tell Python it's a list that by these brackets. And then and this list has 3 items. The first item has a value of 1, the second item has a value of 2, and the third item has a value of 3. Now I can put in different objects in a list. So let's say I put hi, comma 1, and then a list within a list. So this list has 3 items. The first item is a string, the second item is an integer, and the third item is a list, which has 2 items within it, which is 2 integers, 1 and 2. So you can put different data types within the list. So you can also like give variable assignments to a list. So like, let's say I want to create a variable called my list, and it's a list that has A, B, and C. So now my list is A, B, and C. So now let's say that I want to append something to this list. So I want to add this is 1, 2, 3, three objects. So I want to add a fourth one, and I want to call this D. So now if I type in my list, I'll get A, B, C, and D. And I can add more if I want to. So now let's get into how Python basically, positioning in Python. So let's say that I have this list, right? So my list, and I want to, so the way it starts is that to Python, this is the 0, and this is like the location of this item is 0, location of this item is 1, 2, and 3. So it's Python counting starts at 0. So if I want the first item, I would put my list 0, which will give me A. If I want the second item, I'll do 1 because Python starts at 0. Python counting starts at 0. So my list is my list, and I want the second item in that list. So that's position 1. So that'll give me B. So now let's say that I want B and C. So that is item, let's count it, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So that's item 2, or that's item 1, 2, and item 1 and 2. So you could do something like this, where you would get like the on whatever it starts with, it will include. So it will include item 1 or item at position 1, but not include item at position 3. So let's go back to this. So it will include B because it starts at B, and will include B because it's 0, 1, 2, and 3, but it would not include D. So include B and C. So let's see if that works. B and C, because it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's from 1 to 3. It includes 1, but does not include 3. Now you could do something along the lines of like, hey, I don't know how long the list is, but I want the last item. You could do something like -1. So let's apply the same use case to get the last 2 items. So you do something like, it starts at -2 and goes on till the end. And I don't have to like specify when it ends. This just means that include everything from the second last item to the last item. So C and D. So you can, within a list, you can also like change the variable assignment. So like the first variable in this is right now it's A, but I want to change that to new. I could do that here. So I'm going to say that within my list at position 0, change that to new instead of whatever is there. So A was there, now it's going to be new. Oh, yeah, Python is case sensitive. So instead of A now I have new. And so let's go to nested list. So I'm going to create this nested list. And it's basically a bunch of lists within a list, right? So let's say I wanted to get the first 3 letters of this word target. How would I go about it, right? So first, let's say that within nest, where is this located? So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the fourth item in the first list, right? So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. Fourth item, but it will be position 3. So nest 3, that'll get you 4, 5 target. And now I want target. I want this guy right here. So that will be the 0, 1, 2. So that will be the second one. And now I just want TAR. So that would be it starts at 0. So it starts at 0. And I want to go till 0, 1, 2. But I want to include 2, so I'll go to 3. Actually, the way this would work is that I would have to type in a 0 here because this target is actually an item within this list right here. So this will give me just target. And then now I can do, I want to start at the beginning and I want to go up to the third. I want to go up to R's. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3. So up till 3, but not including 3. So that'll give me TAR. You also have the ability to combine lists. So let's say that I'm going to copy for this one. Let's say that I have, this value T, and then I have this value, which is R. And this is all coming from this nest that's right here. So I want to combine these two. So what I will do is, let's say copy plus this. So you have the ability to combine lists, so T and R, right? So now let's talk about, we talked about how to add, which is append, but what if you want to remove something, right? So you could do that by using this method called pop. So what this will do, if you create this and then hit Shift Tab, it'll give you what this does. So it removes and returns item at that index, and the default is the last item. So nest is this. So let's see what this does, right? So it basically took out. Let's see what it took out. It took out this first item right here. So nest, let me see. Let's define nest again and say nest pop. So it took out one, or it took out the last item, right? Because we saw that in here, it was index -1. So that's the same thing as like the last item here. So now if I look at nest, it'll simply be 1, 2, 3. So it took out this whole entire item. Now let's say that I wanted to take out, the default is the last item, but let's say that I'm going to define nest again. Let's say that I wanted to take out a different item, so that I wanted to take out this item right here. This is index 0, right? So if I do that, now if I press nest, so it took out the first one. So the default, it'll take out the last item, but you can define what index you want to take out. So here I said that I want to take out index 0. So that's what it took out. And that's about it for list for now. Let's go into dictionaries. So think of dictionaries as a key pair item. So like I have, my key 1, and then I have semicolon, and then I have item 1, and then I have key 2, and I have item 2, right? And this is in my whole dictionary. So same thing. I'm defining D as a dictionary that has two value that has two values, and I am defining its two key pair values. So let's see what that means. So I have a dictionary D. So if I do D dot values, which is item, so these are the second when so the second one is the value, so it's item 1 and item 2. So if I do something like this, it's going to give me a dict values item 1 and 2. If I want to put this into a list, I could do something like this. So list, and I'm passing in the values from my dictionary D. So I could do something like that. Now if I want to look at, if I just want the first value, I would do something like D values 0. So this will give me, because it's at position 0 or index 0 is item 1. So that will give me, oh, if I do something like this. No, I have to put in a list first. So I put this in a list, and then I get the first one, and that's 0. And that's item 1 right here, right? Because it's the values are item 1 and item 2, and I asked it to give me the value at index 0. And if I wanted the value at index 1, so the second one, I just type in 1, and that'll give me item 2. So again, same thing. Python counting starts at 0. It's kind of annoying and frustrating at first, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So this will give me the values. Now, if I wanted, like I said, this list has 2 items within it, right? So if I do d.items, it'll give me the items within it. So it'll give me these guys. This is the first item. This is the second item. So again, I want to put this into a list. And that'll give me, my first item and my second item. And then, so yeah, that's how, and if I wanted like the first one, I'll put 0. If I wanted the second one, I'll put 1, so on and so forth. So now let's say that, within this, I want to know, if I know the key name, how can I get what value that key has? So let's say that I have D, and I know that the key name is key 1. This will give me the value at key 1. So it's item 1. And if I type in D key 2, it'll give me the value at key 2, which is item 2. Now, one thing to remember is I can't do something like this, because it'll give me that there is no key name 0, because this is for key. I have to put it in a list first if I want to get it by the index position. So that's a little bit about dictionaries. And again, don't get too overwhelmed. Like, the best way to, you might come across these in your coding journey. So this is just a good reference point of like, hey, how like the different data types work. So now let's go over to Booleans. So Booleans is basically true and false. So like, you have your true and you have your false. And in Python, it's native. So if I type in something like, 1 is less than 2, it'll give me, hey, true. Yeah, that is true. 1 is less than 2. If I type in something like 1 is greater than 2, it'll give me false, because 1 is not greater than 2. That's a little bit about Booleans. And I'll show you how to like use this in the and like how we use this in like if else statements and whatnot a bit later on in this section. So now let's go to tuples, and I'm gonna make the same markdown. So it's fairly similar, and this data type is fairly similar to list, but you cannot change it. So like, I have a tuple and it has 1, 2, 3 within it, right? And the way the other differentiation is, this is in parentheses, not in not in brackets. So my tuple, I assigned it. It's t, and it has values 1, 2, and 3. So if I wanted just 2 and 3, I would do something like, I would say the index. So index 0. This is 0, 1, 2. So something like 1 forever, or 1 till the end. So from 2 onward, or I could even do something like this, which is, from index 1 to index 3, but not including index 3. So including index 1 and 2, like that. So like I said, the one difference between this is that like a tuple is not, you cannot change it. So if I wanted to say that, hey, change the position, or change the value at index 0 to new, it's not going to be able to do that. Tuple object does not support item assignment. Whereas if this was a list, I could do that, as we saw earlier. So now let's go into sets. So now that I have sets, what sets does is it'll give you the unique values within any, like whatever you pass into it, and it's curly brackets, similar to a dictionary. So if I have like 1, 2, 3, it'll give me all the unique values in 1, 2, and 3. Now if I have something, and I'm going to copy this, if I have something like this, so I have 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are my unique values. So it'll give me those unique values. So that's what sets are. Now let's talk about comparison operators. So markdown. Okay. So we talked about this before, or we used it earlier when I was explaining the Boolean, but like I could do like a greater than sign. Say is 1 greater than 2? No, it's not. It is 1 less than 2. So this is the less than operator that that Python recognizes. Is 1 less than 2? No, it's not. It is 1 greater than or equal to 1. And yep, it has to be together. So greater than or equal to, is 1 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, it is. So true. Is 1 less than or equal to 4? Yes, it is. So we have greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and we also have, as we saw earlier, like equal to, right? So is A equal, I say that A is equal to 2. So this is variable assignment here. But if I wanted to do something like A equals 2, or A equals 1, so the value of A is 2. If I wanted to see if something is equal to that, I would use the double equal sign. So A, 2, A, which is 2, is that equal to 1? No, it's not. So let's say that I wanted to do something like if A is equal to 1, so I'm gonna close this out. A is equal to 2. So I'm going to create a if else statement. I'm going to say if A equals to 1, print hello. And then if it's not equal to 1, else. So if A is equal to 1, then print hello. Other else, print not hello. So the value of A currently is 2. So it's going to go through this if else statement. And this is how this is so I want to highlight the difference between this equal sign and this equal sign. This equal sign is variable assignment. So here I'm saying is that, I'm creating a variable called A and I'm assigning a value of 2. Here I'm saying, is if A is equal to 1. So if the value of A is equal to 1, which is different from, hey, assign A value of 2 here. So if the value of A is equal to 1, print hello. If it's not, then print not hello. So this is going to print not hello because the value of a does not equal 1. So now the same thing, I can do something like, not equal to. So hi is not equal to bye, right? Which could be mean too. So this is the not equal to sign. So if I wanted to do something like this, if a is not equal to 1, so remember that a is equal to 2. So if a is not equal to 1, print hello, otherwise print not hello. This will print hello because a is not equal to 1. So that's a bit of the comparison operators. Now let's go into logic operators. This is marked down. So the logic operators are and or. So I want to do something like, 1 is greater than 2 and 2 is less than 3. So if if I'm using and, both of these conditions have to be true in order for me to get it true. So is 1 greater than 2? False. And 2 is greater than, and 2 is less than 3? That's true. But because it's an and operator, this will give me a false. Or if I change this, it'll give me a true because both of these are true. So now let's, similar example, 1 is greater than 2, or here I'm using or, so either condition has to be true. So 1 is greater than 2, that's not true. But because this is true, it'll give me a true. Let's look at another condition. So 1 is equal to 2, that's false, or 2 is equals 3, that's false, or 4 is equal to 4, that's true. And because it's an or operator, only one condition has to be true. So this will give me a true. So that's a bit of the logic operators. Now let's get into if, elif, and else statements. Right, so I did this earlier, but I'll do it again. So like, if I want to do an if-else condition, it's basically saying that, hey, check if this condition is true. So this is condition 1. If this condition is true, do this. And remember, you do have to indent, and the way I'm indenting is by using tab. So if this condition is true, do this. So I'm just gonna say print do this. Otherwise, so if else, press enter too soon, print do this second, right? So if 1 is greater than 2, so I'm giving it an if else statement, I'm giving it some condition, in which case the condition is 1 is less than 2, then do this, otherwise do this. So is 1 less than 2? Yes, it is. So it will print do this. It won't get to this point right here, right? So if I do this, it'll print do this. But if I give it a different condition, if 1 is greater than 2, which it's not, it's going to do whatever is in the else block. So it's going to do this second. That's what it's going to do. So that's the example of an if-else state. And so I went over that. Now let's talk about what if you have multiple conditions, right? So let's say that if 1 is equal to 2, print first L, and you can put a elif. So this is my second condition. Elif 3 is equal to 3, print middle, else, print we will never get to this. So what this will do is it'll go through the different conditions, right? So now I have more than one condition. So if condition 1 is true, it will print this first one. It won't get to the rest of the code block. If condition 1 is not true, then it'll go to the second condition. Is 3 is equal to 3? Yes, it is. So it'll print this, and it will never get to this in this particular block of code. So it print middle because 1 is not equal to 2, so it went to the second one, second condition, which is 3 is equal to 3, which is true, so it printed middle. It never got to here. So now with that, let's discuss try and accept. So try and accept is actually, I really like using try and accept because let's say that you have some code that is not going to work, right? So like we discussed earlier that you cannot add a string and a integer, right? So you cannot do this. It'll give you an error. Well, let's say that you had that and then you had something like print hello. So this line of code is correct, but this line of code is not correct, right? So, but it will never get to this second line of code because it gives you an error on this first one. So how do you get around that? You do something like a try and accept. A try and accept is something like this. So I'm going to try ABC plus the integer 2. If it doesn't work, I'm going to do an accept condition. I'm going to say that result is ABC plus string 3. So it can do this, right? I'm going to tell it to print this result. So even though, so it tried this, it failed here, and so it moved on to the accept condition, which I gave it that, hey, if this fails, do this accept condition. So now let's look at something like this. So I'm going to try print ABC plus hello. So there's nothing wrong with this block, this print statement, but it's ABC plus 2. This is not going to work, right? So what it's going to do is, so here I'm doing a few things. I'm giving in my try block, I'm giving it 2 conditions. So it's going to do condition, or I'm giving it 2 lines of code. So it's going to execute this line of code, then it's going to execute this line of code. Now, this line of code will work fine, but this line of code won't work fine. And when this fails, it'll jump into this accept state. And when it jumps into this accept statement, I'm just telling it pass, which is essentially saying like move on to the next line of code. So, or next block of code. So I'm gonna go to this piece of code. So again, it tried this block of code. It was able to, execute this line. There was an error here, and because there was a try and accept, it went to the accept block, which basically said pass, like go to the next block of code, which is just go to this piece, which is like this line of code right here. So let's say that I'm doing a try and accept, and I wanted to figure out what the error was, but I just wanted, and I wanted to print that error. I could do something like this. So try this, accept, exception as E. So here I'm basically saying that my exception is E, and I'm going to print that exception. And then I'm going to go to I'm going to write a new code. So go to this piece of code. So it tried that, right? It tried ABC plus 2, and there was an exception. And so in here, I told it to print that exception. So the exception was can only concatenate string, not integer to string. So it's basically this same error that you got here. But it didn't give you an error because it was in a try and accept block. And so it went on to the next line of code, which is this. So that's try and accept. Very useful feature that Python has. We'll use it a lot in this. And now let's go to loops. So what is a loop? Loop, as the name kind of like says, is basically like looping through an object or looping through a piece of code or anything you have. So let's say you have a list, right? You have a list and it has 5 values, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So that's, and we call this list my list. So now I'm gonna say I could do something like this. So I'm gonna create a for loop, and I'm gonna say that for item in my list. So what does item represent here? Item represents, at each point. So it represents the individual, individual item in that list. But I can call this item anything I want. I can say that, hey, for X in my list, or for Y in my list, or for item in my list, right? I can call it anything I want. So I'm going to say for item in my list, let's just first print item. So let's see what this does. This will do, so for each item in my list, print that item, right? So like I said, you can name it anything you want. So for X in my list, print X, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For, I can name it anything I want. Again, want to emphasize this point, print Y. So same thing. So let's go say that for item in my list, print item, right? But now I'm saying that for item in my list, I'm giving it a if else. I'm doing like a if else block of code. So for item in my list, if item is equal to 1, then print that item. Otherwise, print, or so else, print not 1, right? So it's gonna go, this is a for loop, and it's gonna go through this, I'm telling it to loop through this list, and I'm saying that for each item in that list, if the item is equal to 1, print that item, so print like whatever that value is at that item. Otherwise, print not 1, right? So what will this do? On the first, it went through the first item and it printed 1 because it's 1 is equal to 1, so it went through this condition. And then for it looped through the rest of the list, so it looped to 2, 3, 4, and 5, and those were the item values, and it compared it. Are those values equal to 1? They're not, so it went to this block of code, so it printed not 1. Let's do another example of this, right? So let's say we have a new list called 1 and 2, and I'm going to say to switch it up a bit, I'm going to say for value in new list, print yep, right? So you could do something like, it will print, and because there's 2, so for I don't have to have like a condition, right? I had no condition here. So it went through that new list, it looped through that new list, and for each value it printed yep. And since there were 2 values, it printed yep twice. So now let's create a new one. Let's call this list sequence. I'm going to say that I'm going to give it has values of 1, 2, 3, and 45, right? And I'm going to say so for, again, emphasizing that this first one, which represents the item in the list, you can name it anything you want. So I'm going to say for jelly in this list in sequence, which is a list, I'm going to say print jelly plus jelly. So print the item value plus that item value. So it's going to print 1 plus 1, which is 2, 2 plus 2, which is 4, 3 plus 3, which is 6, 45 plus 45, which is 90. So it went through that whole list and then added those values for you. Now let's talk about while loops. So while loops are, for while loops, the way they work is that it will keep going until some condition is met. So let's say that I have a variable and it has a value of 1, right? So I can write a while loop and I can say that while I is less than 5, right, print, and I'm going to use what we learned from earlier in this section. So I'm going to print I is whatever that value is. So, and I'm going to pass in that value in terms of a format. So while I is less than 5, print I, right? So if I ran this, I will do not run this piece of code because it'll keep going on forever because I is always less than 5 because I is equal to 1, right? So I'm going to say that, hey, I'm going to give it some sort of logic and say that I is I plus 1. So here I'm saying that I starts off with as 1. So while I is less than 5, print I, and then once it's done printing it, add 1 to I. So this is like a counter. So add 1 to I and go through that loop again because that while condition will still remain true. I will still be less than 5 once you add 1 the first time and the second time, and eventually it will stop being less than 5. So let's see what this does. It'll go through and it says that, okay, let's go through I, and at first I is 1. So is I less than 5? Yes, it is. So it's going to print I. So it's going to print I is 1, and then it's going to add 1. It's going to be serve as a counter, so it's going to add 1 to I. So now I is 2. Is 2 less than 5? Yes, it is. So I is 2, and then it's going to add 1 to I, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like how while loops work. Keep in mind that this is while loops, while they're great for certain problems, um, if you don't write it correctly, it will run forever because that condition won't be met or whatever have you, right? So you wanna be really careful while writing while loops. Let's talk about range. So range is I really like using range. So let's say that you have a variable a and it's equal to 1, and then you do a for loop and you say something like for I in range. So let's actually do this. Let's do range a through 7. So range 8 through so range 1 through 7. What does that give me? That gives me range. So let's actually do this. Let's look at just range by itself. So let's look at range 7, right? That's from 0 to 7. So if I do something like for I in range 7, right? I. So print, so range 7 includes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So now I can give it something like this. So instead of from 0, I want to go from 1, which is, in this case, A is the same thing as 1. So for I in range 1 through 7, print I, so it's going to print from 1 through 6. So this number is included, this number, or this number is not included, and this number is included. So range 1 through 7 includes 1, but does not include 7. And you can, so this is the starting point, and this is their end point. So if I actually want to show you guys something, so if I do range, parentheses, and do shift tab, it actually shows you the different arguments that this takes. So it takes either stop. So in which case, if you just pass in one argument, it'll stop at that argument. So it'll stop at 7. If you pass in 2 arguments, it's a start and a stop. And then you can also pass in a step, which basically means that, hey, you know, from this to this range, take this many steps. So skip this many values. So let's look at something like, this is useful when you're like looping through data, looping through a list and whatnot. So let's go through list range 6 or range 7. What will that give you? That'll give you a list from 0 to 6, so not including 7. So that's basically what you have. Something that's really valuable is I would do something like range length 5, right? No, sorry. Or range length of like some object. So let's say you have some sort of list, right? You have some sort of list like x equals 1, 2, 3. So this has so x has a length of 3. So this is basically like saying range 3. So from 0 to 3. Or you can do something like range length of x. And it will give you the same thing. So that's range for you. It's very useful function when you're doing for loops of like through list that you don't know the sizes of and whatnot, or the length of. Now let's talk a little bit about list comprehension. So I'm gonna say markdown. So the list comprehension. So let's say I have a list 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And that's my list. I'm going to say that I'm going to create a new list. And the way I do that is I just say that I'm going to create a new list called Fox. I'm going to say that Fox is this new list. And then I'm going to say that for each item in X, so for item in X, I'm going to append, which means I'm adding to this list that I just created here. At this point, Fox has nothing in it. The append function, I can add stuff to Fox. So I'm going to add whatever that item value is that I'm on. So let me actually do this. So print item, and then Fox dot append item squared 2, or to the second power. And then I'm going to print Fox. Actually, I'm going to write print Fox in here. Right, so it goes through, what it does, it goes through and this list, because we have for loop, it goes through every item in X, and then it prints the item. So it goes through and it's on the first value, so it's 1. So 1 squared is 1. And then it goes through 2, and it adds that item to Fox again. So 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. And now Fox has, 1, 4, 9, and 16. So that's a little bit of that. Like one other way to do this, and if I didn't want to write a for loop, I could do something like this, which is for x equals item times 2 for item in X. So this is essentially the same thing. This is essentially like the for loop. For item in X, do this. So for item in X, in each item do this, and then that's part of my list, which is a new list called X. And so now if I do X, it's the same thing, right? So same thing that you can write, like if you want to write, if you wanted to write this out, write this like for loop out, but you wanted to do it within one line of code, you could do something like this. Now, if you're a beginner, this is, you probably just want to go with this approach first before you get to this approach, because it's just easier, like readability is better here. But that's another way to do it. So now let's talk about functions. So I can, functions is basically a way to write repeatable, like to avoid writing repeatable code. So let's say that and the way you write function is like you say that you're going to define something, and then you write the name of the function. So let's say that the name of the function that I choose is my func, and then you define like whatever variables you're expecting in that function. So in this, and you can name this anything you want. Similar to in the for loop, you could name this value anything you want, right? So I'm defining a function called myfunc, and all that function is gonna do is print whatever value I pass into it. And so let's take a example of this, right? So if I type in myfunc hello, it's just gonna print hello. Now, one thing you can do within functions is do something like this, right? So triple quotes, and you can type in like some documentation that goes about this function here, right? And so now whenever I write my func, and if I do shift tab, it'll show you like whatever the document string is. And if you notice, like whenever we were using the function range, it had some documentation string as well, right? Shift star, it had some doc string, right? And so this is the documentation that someone wrote. So this is basically like telling what this function does. This is good practice. You should definitely do this. But yeah, so that's kind of like saying what this function does, and then passing in that function, or passing in whatever you want to pass into that function. So I'm going to cut this. And so let's say that I do something like this, right? I say my func. It's expecting an argument called x, and because I didn't pass in that argument, it's gonna give me an error. And I can also do something like this, my func, and I can say that, hey, that argument x that you want is equal to new param, right? And it'll print out new param. Or I can just simply go ahead and pass in that argument new param, and it'll print that. Now, if I, similar to like what I said earlier, if you don't define like what that parameter is, then it goes by like what order you pass it into the function. And so let's take a look at that. So I copy this over, and now I have a function which basically it's the same function, but now it divides code, right? It divides the two variables I pass into it. So I can type in my func 2 and 3. So this will give me 2 divided by 3, right? Which is 0.66. Or I can type in my func 3, 2, which will give me 1.5. Now, so remember, and because I didn't define what x is and what y is in my function, it just assumes that the first value is x and the second value is y. Now I can do something like this, where I define the values, where I say that x is equal to 2 and y is equal to 3, and then order doesn't matter. Then I can say that, hey, my func y is, and I'm passing in, it's expecting a value y. I'm saying that that value is 3, and I'm saying that x is equal to 2. So even though I put it in a different order than it's expecting, it's able to recognize what is x, what is y, and it'll still give me 0.6. Whereas here, it gave me 1.5 because it did 3 divided by 2, not 2 divided by 3. So now let's look at, how you would return something from a function. So let's say that you have some function, let's call this function first item, and you say that you're going to pass in, this function is expecting some list. Again, I can call this anything I want, right? So what this function does is it takes that list and it passes in, and it grabs the first item from that list. So now if I have a list called 3, 4, what it's going to do, and I type in, like, let's say I do first item x, That's going to return the first item from X, which is 3. Now, let's say that I were to type in something that is not, that it cannot understand, what will it give me? So let's say that I type in hello. So it still is able to give you the first item, but let's say that the index was out of range, right? So let's say that the index was 1,000, and I typed in first item hello. It'll give me an error because it'll say that the string index is out of range. Or let's say that instead of passing in a list object into that function, I passed in a something that's not like subscribe something that is not, you can, like something like I guess a dictionary or something, then it'll give me an issue. So let's actually take that example and put it to work. So let's say that my dictionary is 1 and so keep pair 1 and item 1, pair 2 and item 2. So this is my dictionary, and let's see what happens when I pass in this dictionary into this function I created. It'll give me an error because there is no key name. It's expecting it's taking whatever that item is and getting the 1,000 position at that item. Or, in this case, it's getting the key. It's getting like D1000. Now, since 1000 is not a key value or a key value here, then it's not going to give me anything. It's going to give me a key error that, hey, you don't have 1000 key in this dictionary that you were passing in. So that's a bit about function. Now let's talk about Python classes and how they fit into functions. So let's say that you have something called in Python a class, right? And there's some benefits of using a class because a class will have like certain methods or functions within it that you can use, but you don't have to pass that value into that function each time. So I'm actually going to work a bit backwards on this, right? So let's say that you have a function that's called addition. So if you're following on this one, it's right here. It's going to be a little different, but we're eventually going to get to this. So let's say you have a function called addition, and what that function does is it takes a x value and a y value, and it returns x plus y, right? So now I have what I can call, so now I can use addition 1, 2, and it'll give me 1 plus 2. Similarly, let's have another function called subtraction, and it also takes x and y, and it returns x minus y. And so if I do subtraction 1, 2, it'll give me spelling error. It'll give me a spelling error. I can't spell, so it's subtraction, right? If I define this function subtraction and I say that, hey, I'm calling this function subtraction and I'm passing in 1 and 2, and it's giving me a spelling error again. So I'm just going to copy this and say that, hey, I'm calling this function, and to give me 1 minus 2, which is -1. So now in both cases, I had to pass in this function, right? Now let's say that I had 1,000 functions that I wanted to do that I wanted to name under certain class, let's say called math functions. I don't want to pass in, like in this particular one, I would have to pass in addition, and then I would have to pass in the same numbers again and again, I don't want to do that, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a class called math functions. Now within this class, I'll have, what I'll do is I'll initialize this, and I'll say that, hey, this is so what I can do here is I can create a math functions class, and I can say that, hey, I'm expecting, and this is called a initialization of a class. So what I can do is basically say that, hey, it's expecting, now self refers to an object, self refers to the class itself. So I'm going to say something like self x equals x, and then self dot y equals y. And so now I have a math functions class. Now what I can do here is I can say something like math functions 1, 2, right? And what that would do, or say something like my class equals that. And I can say that, hey, my class.x. Now you know that my class.x is whatever I put in when I initialize the function, and my class.y, which is 2, so 1 and 2. So the benefit of that is now that if I want to go here and I want to add these functions, what I can do is I can define addition as just self, and I can say that this is, I can say return self.x plus self.y. I can say something like define subtraction, and I'm passing in self, so I'm passing in, this is going to tell it to like refer back to what self is when we initialize the class. And then I'm going to return self.x minus self.y. So I'm gonna hit Shift Enter again so that this code, and so that we have this code. I'm gonna run this again. But now what I can do is I can call these functions after I've initialized my class. So I have an addition function, and that'll give me 3, and I have a subtraction function. And I spell subtraction wrong again, so let me fix that. I have a subtraction. I cannot spell today, subtraction. So I run this, and I gotta reinitialize my class because I entered new code. So that, and that. So I get -1, which is 1 minus 2. So the whole point of this is to show you that now, if I have like 100 functions, I don't have to keep passing in the same parameters again. I can just call the function off of this class to be able to, do whatever action that I want to do. Now I can have something like this, right? Like, hey, this is expecting I can like write a function, and let's say the subtraction function is expecting a parameter z that it's going to subtract from after it subtracts x from y. So let's say that it's something like that, right? And then the addition one would work the same, but when I call subtraction, now it's expecting an argument z. So once I pass in, let's say the argument that I pass in is, 100. So it's going to take 1 minus 2 minus 100. So it's basically 102. So yeah, 1 minus 2, which is -1, minus 100 is -101. And that's essentially what's happening here. So that is a bit over like how classes and functions work. We'll get to this later in the course when we create the bot. But this is really a good way to organize your code as well. So now that that's done, let's go into lambda expressions. So once I get into lambda expression, so let's say that I have like a, so lambda expression, what is it? It's just basically a faster way to write a function. So let's say I have a function called times2, and it takes in some variable, and what it does is that it returns that variable times 2, right? So the way this works is I call the function times2, I pass in 2, it's 2 times 2 is 4. I can do something like times 2 times 100, so it's 100 times 2, 200, and so on and forth. So another way I can write this function times 2, so I'm going to call this times 2 new, is basically say that lambda var, so, and var times 2. So this basically means that whenever this function, whenever this is called, whatever variable is passed in, take that variable and times it by 2. Essentially the same thing we're doing here. So let's put this into action. So let's do times 2 times 3, which 3 times 2 is 6, or sorry, times 2 new times 3, which is 6. And then let's take this and type in the 100 again, and so on and so forth. So again, you have the same thing again, where so it's just that lambda is just a different way to write a function. This is really useful when you're working with like data frames, and like, when you're heavy into like CSV files, Excel files and whatnot. This comes in really handy. But just wanted to show you guys how to use this as part of this crash course. Let's go into map and filter. So map and filter. So let's say I have a list called sequence, and it's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the list. And what map does is basically, I can take a function there, right? So let's say that I took this times 2 function, right? And I want to apply it to every single items in that list. So basically like a for loop, but I want to do it in a faster way. So what map does is I can do something like this, map times 2. So with the function I want to apply and whatever I want to apply it to. So in this case, I'm applying it to this list, right? So this will actually just give you that, but if you put something like x equals this, and then list of, and then put x in the list, you'll see that this is basically 1 times 2, which is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, so on and so forth. So essentially a faster way to apply your function to a whole list. Now let's say that let's say that you want to use one line of code, because here we have defined what times 2 it. So let's use the lambda functionality we learned here while using maps. So let's say that we're going to do list, and we're going to say that map, and instead of saying times 2, we're just going to convert that to a lambda function, which is lambda x times 2, and we're still passing in sequence into this map. So this will basically take sequence, and for every item in sequence, it will times it by 2. Let's actually times it by 3 to kind of see the difference. So again, my sequence is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all these values are essentially 1 times 3. So 1 times 3, 2 times 3, 3 times 3, 4 times 3, 6 times 8, 3, so on and so forth. Now let's bring in filter into the mix. So let's say that and the way I do filter, map will just apply it for the whole list, right? So for filter, the way I can do it is that I can say the same thing. I can say that, I want to apply a filter, and once the filter is done, I want to convert it to a list so I can see the results. And I'm going to I'm going to create a lambda function, and this lambda function is going to be item divided, like whatever is in the list divided by 2, and it's going to be some sort of condition. So here the condition is 0. So that means that, hey, for every item in sequence, if I divide it by 2 and I set it equal to 0, then return me that item. Otherwise, don't return that item. So let's see what happens. So if I do 1 divided by 2, that doesn't give me 0, so I don't return that. I do 2 divided by 2, that gives me 0. 3 divided by 2 doesn't give me 0. 4 divided by 2 gives me 0, so I get 4 back. 5 divided by 2 doesn't give me 0. 6 divided by 2 gives me 0, so I get 6 back. So let's take this and apply it to another function. Let's create a list. So I'm going to do filter first. So filter lambda for item, for each item, take that item and times it by 2, and if it's equal to 6, then return it. Otherwise, don't return it. And let's create a list out of this. So only 3 divided times 2 is 6. So that's the only reason why only 3 will be returned. That's kind of how map and filter go. Very useful, in your Python journey. Very useful functions to have in your back pocket. Now let's take methods. So we've actually gone through methods, but I just want to show you what they are. So basically you have a string, right? You have a string and you call the string, hello, my name is Sam. So what you can do is call a method of this string, and you have like a lot of different methods, right? But let's say some of the common ones is like you want all of this in lowercase. So you do st.lower, and again, you can hit Shift Tab to see what this does, what this function does, and it says returning a copy of the string converted to lowercase. So let's see what this does. So if you see this Sam, this S in Sam is converted to a lowercase s. Let's take this and convert it to uppercase. So essentially, if you do st.tab and you see all these methods that you can call, these are all methods that you can call off of it. And if you want to read the documentation, you'd simply go to, like, right at that function, go in between and hit Shift Tab, and you can see like the documentation. So what this does is that returns a list of the words in the string using separator as the delimiter string, and the separator, usually it's none. So let's say that I have something like this. It's going to take that string and it's going to divide it into a list based on spaces. So now, like, hello, my name is Sam is essentially a list with 5 objects in it, 5 string objects in it. And so let's say that you had a tweet, right? And it was something like, go sports, hashtag sports. And you wanted to take this tweet and you wanted to split it up, but you want to split up the tweet and then the hashtags. So how would you go about that? You do something like tweet.split hashtag or this, and this will give you go sports, and so it's basically separating at this point instead of at the space. So you can define, if you don't, the default method of splitting is on spaces. And if you don't define, if you don't put in a parameter when calling this method. But you can pass in a parameter and say that, hey, instead of splitting it on space, I want to split it on, $, or whatever it is that you want to split on. And so there you have it. And so let's say that here I wanted to do something like, just get the hashtag. I could do something like this: tweet.split. Hey, split my tweet on the $, and then give me the the second object in that. So that'll give me sports, because this is index 0, this is index 1, excuse me. So let's talk about some of the other methods that we kind of like touched, but we didn't really specify it was a method, right? So like off of the dictionary, you can call all these different methods, right? So let's say I want to call the key method. And again, I'm going to hit I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go inside the parentheses and hit shift tab. I guess it doesn't have the document string. Oh, nope, because I don't have it correctly. So I'm going to do d.keys and then hit shift tab. And it says a set like object providing a view on these keys. So this is going to give you all the keys that dictionary has. So our dictionary has that key pair. So this is going to give you all the keys. So if I had more keys here, it'll give me more. Let's say that I want to do d.items, same thing. This will return the items. And let's say that I want to do something like I have a list, right? I have a list and I say it's 1, 2, 3. And the append method and the pop method that we called earlier, it's the same thing. So here, the pop method, let's see what it does. So I hit shift tab. Remove and return item at an index. The default is last. So if you see like the default is, it's expecting a parameter, but it's not necessary. It's because it's defaults into something. So the default is the last one, but let's say that I wanted instead of the last one, I wanted the first one. So return 1, and it will remove 1 from the list. So if I look at list again, it's 2 and 3. So some other functionality I could do within list. This is not methods, but this is kind of just useful to know. If I type in something like x in 1, 2, 3, is x in 1, 2, 3? It's not. Is x in x, y, and z? Is it in this list? Yes, it is. So it's true. So with that kind of goes over the Python crash course. What I'll do is I'll give you guys some assignments to work on your own with answer keys, and which will basically reinforce some of the learnings we have done here. But really, the best way to learn Python is by doing. This is just a crash course, so you guys can like kind of follow along and have the ability to read code as I go through it. So yeah, with that, that marks the end of this question or end of this section. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave comments and I'll get back to them. Thank you so much.